Okay, Henry Thomas, right?
Yes. You want me looking at the lens?
You can look at me.
Okay.
Just look at me and hold still.
All right.
That's the only thing I ask.
Okay.
Great pitch. Once again, grandson of Washington Senators Hall of Fame pitcher Walter Johnson, Hank Thomas.
When I was growing up, I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, and always from when I was very small and just learning about baseball, my father and our family would talk about Walter Johnson.
Hank Thomas, an author and the grandson of baseball legend Walter Johnson, has dedicated much of his life to preserving his grandfather's legacy. While Walter Johnson is widely celebrated as one of the greatest pitchers in baseball history, Thomas has worked to ensure fans also remember the kind and remarkable man behind the Hall of Fame stats.
He grew up in Humboldt or outside of Humboldt on a farm, and what that was like and how that contributed to shaping his character and personality, which was a large part of his story. Walter was very special to a lot of people. And he was in the time, here we are 100 years later, and it's a special story. The name Walter Johnson will be meaningful. And to me, that's just great. He'd be modest about it. I don't have to be. I'm his grandson. I can think of it as a pretty big deal.
For the land of the free and the home of the brave.
In 1999, the 75th anniversary of Walter Johnson's World Series victory with the Washington Senators was celebrated. That same year, Hank Thomas traveled to Humboldt to take part in the Johnson Sweat Classic baseball tournament.
Johnson's grandson hopes this annual event will be a positive reminder to kids that dreams can come true.
I hope that it gives them the idea that as far as those men went in their careers and in life, that if these kids worked hard and applied themselves and kept on the straight and narrow, that they could achieve the same kind of results in their own lives.
During his visits to Humboldt, Kansas, Thomas met a baseball historian, sparking a lasting friendship.
I did some book signings in Humboldt, and especially when I met Dick Davis, who just made it a project. Humboldt native, who was then living in Iola.
You all have heard of the Oscar and maybe the Grammys and the Whammys. I was thinking about this because it looks something like those things. I think maybe we could call this the Wally. This is a statue, a bronze statue, solid bronze, of Walter Johnson. And it's my pleasure to present this to Dick and Gloria Davis on behalf of the Walter Johnson family, and I'm sure I speak for the George Sweat family, and probably lots of other families in this area too, just to thank them, just a little token to thank them for all that they've done on our behalf.
And I think he spent his life just trying to be the best person he could be and do as much as he could while he was here. He knew he wasn't going to be here to be an old age, so he just tried to pack as much into his life as he could and do as much good as he could.
Seemed like almost every year there for a few years I was going out, and my mother went out one time for a banquet, and Dick got Buck O'Neill to come over from the Negro Leagues Hall of Fame in Kansas City, and that was very cool, I thought.
In the summer of 2023, one of Davis's cherished projects was brought back to life, a roadside sign honoring Walter Johnson. Davis, who passed away in 2011, left a lasting legacy, and over a decade later, someone close to him led the effort to restore the tribute.
So really, because it took 3 years really to get it from the time we started fundraising and the idea sprouted to the time it actually went up was about 3 years. But I think that project helped prove myself, and I know that Hank had told me that getting that sign up was the only proof he needed that I would be responsible with his artifacts from the family. So I'm glad we started with that project. It was a good launching point from everything else that we're doing.
I got to know about Allie's efforts in Humboldt, what she was doing, and particularly because I'd seen her grandfather do a number of things like that. I knew it wasn't that easy. Allie and her family happened to be passing through my area, going to a family function. You know, a little caption in my head, a little brainstorm. I said, how about if you rent a van and on your way back home, load it up with my stuff. And I don't care what you do with it. Maybe someday there'll be a museum.
This is going on camera, so I like this because it really it cements the idea. So it's like, it's out there now, so I gotta make it happen. So my plans for the artifacts is to have a museum in downtown Humboldt, Kansas. I would like to fix up one of the old buildings that's still there, just to preserve some history. I want there to be a museum with the artifacts that showcase the Walter Johnson story and also the George Swett story.
George Swett, a native of Humboldt, Kansas, etched his name in history as a member of the 1924 Kansas City Monarchs. That legendary team claimed the World Series title. In Humboldt, the legacy of George Swett endures thanks to the dedication of Allie Utley's grandfather. His tireless efforts ensured that Swett's achievements would not be forgotten, bringing well-deserved recognition to one of Humboldt's own, a man who triumphed on baseball's biggest stages.
They found out that George Swett was the first African American to get a scholarship here at Pittsburgh in the 1920s, and
In the early 2000s, Davis generously donated a remarkable collection of artifacts honoring baseball legends Walter Johnson and George Swett to Pittsburgh State University. Years later, Allie Utley took a moment to carefully examine these treasures, connecting with the rich history they represent.
Wow, I've never seen this before. This is a stone from the original Walter Johnson house. Very fancy photo of Walter not playing baseball, but doing, I don't know, something else. But I think that's just a really interesting insight of what his life is like outside of baseball.
this is a picture of my wife Gloria that we're going to leave here for people in Pittsburgh. Gloria has been the backbone and done the paperwork and all the behind-scene things as far as having the dinners, and this year we were so blessed to have Walter Johnson's daughter come to Humboldt.
Dick had some difficulties with his MS, with his mobility. He got ideas. He would, I had to be there. It was just necessary that I be there and try to keep him safe.
I think I'm just really proud of my grandfather. He was an old white guy from from Kansas. He had no reason to look any farther than the Walter Johnson story. He didn't have to really get into the George Swett era or story or anything like that, but he chose to because he knew that it was a good story that deserved to be told.
We are equally blessed to have Walter Johnson's grandson, Hank Thomas, with us today. Welcome, Hank.
Thomas was invited by the Minnesota Twins to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Washington Senators' World Series victory. Honoring his grandfather's legacy, Thomas extended the invitation to Allie Utley, whose efforts to preserve Johnson's history in Humboldt, Kansas, made her a fitting guest for the occasion.
It was a blast. Beginning to end, it was such a blast. It was a whirlwind of a trip because it only was, I think, like a weekend. But we were flown out. Both of us were on, these very fancy airplane seats, and then we got picked up by a limousine at the airport, and we were treated like royalty. And it's one thing, I think, for Hank to get treated that way because he is baseball royalty, in my opinion. But for him to extend that offer and let me join him to represent the Humboldt part of the Walter Johnson story, it's just super generous. And I think it just goes to show how much the Walter Johnson family is still connected to their roots in Kansas, which is, you don't see that very often. When people go off and get famous, they usually kind of leave that sort of thing behind. But they definitely haven't. And it was really, I was really thankful that I got to join them for that.
To have the twins pay this much attention to my grandfather's legacy and history and that of the 1924 World Series champions is special. It's just special. And God bless them for doing that.
And Hank, I want to tell you, I heard about your grandfather when I was an 8-year-old boy, and I heard about Ozzie Bloogie and Goose Goslin. And of course, we're here to celebrate the 100th anniversary of when your grandfather, with that side wheel and delivery, pitched the Senators to their only World Series victory 100 years ago.
Thomas was honored with the opportunity to throw out the first pitch in Minnesota. While it wasn't his first time taking the mound for such an occasion, it was a special moment celebrating his grandfather's enduring legacy.
You've got one job. No pressure.
Thanks.
No pressure.
Thanks. You could help. You could go find me a baseball.
We now invite that first pitch ball to be delivered to you by Clark Griffith. Catching the first pitch today is Twins third base coach Tommy Watkins. Hank, it's your pitch. The grandson of the big train, Hank Thomas. Well done. We now fast forward 100 years to 2024 and get ready for 21st century baseball.
Later that year, Thomas received another special invitation to join in a celebration honoring his grandfather.
Yeah, so we were invited by the Washington Nationals because they were honoring the 1924 World Series win. And that was also an amazing trip. I think the thing that differs the most between Minnesota and the DC trip was, Nats Park was Hank's home crowd.
And now, here to throw out today's ceremonial first pitch, please welcome grandson of Washington Senators Hall of Fame pitcher Walter Johnson, Hank Thomas.
For some reason, the people to be feel the American public wants to hear nothing but bad stuff and not about good guys like Walter Johnson and Cal Ripken.
Yeah, I wouldn't say nothing. I mean, the good guys get plenty of attention, but especially as you go down through history, over the years, the sharp edges are what, come through, and the scandals, and the good guys do tend to be lost.
Walter Johnson should have the same respect in Kansas that Amelia Earhart or President Eisenhower has. If I can get to the point where people remember Walter not just for his greatness, but also for his contributions to society, his dedication to his family and to his community, and also just being a great athlete, I think I've done my job correctly.
Allie Utley has picked up the standard and is carrying on the tradition of her grandfather, and it's just a wonderful thing, and you know, you get the feeling like, well, this isn't all just happening. This isn't all just coincidence, you know. Not to be mystical about it or anything, but there's something going on here, you know. So and however much I can contribute to that, being his grandson and writing the book, and I expect there'll be a trip or two out to Humboldt in my future before I get too old to do that.
Everybody kind of thinks that they have a really cool grandpa, but I think our grandpas and their track records prove themselves as some really superior grandfathers, I think. Of course, I'm a little biased, but yeah, I think that's definitely what connects us. And I think if I had never met Hank, I really don't think any of this would have ever happened. So I'm gonna ask you this or that questions. I got a couple. And it's gonna be fast, okay? So you gotta think quick. Okay.
Okay.
A day game or night game?
Day game.
Wooden bat or aluminum bat?
Wooden bat.
Fastball or curveball?
Fastball.
Coffeyville or Humboldt?
Humboldt.
Dick Davis or Allie Utley?
Both.
That's all I have.
That's great. What fun.